In today's episode, I have several different items to share. I updated my Digitrax DT602D Throttle to the latest firmware. Then I finished the repairs to my Kato GG1 Blackjack, and finally I installed 3 decoders, but only 2 of the installations were successful. Welcome to Humanity Junction, where the city intersects with humans. Since the release of the Digitrax DT602D Throttle, there have been 3 firmware updates. The latest update was released on September 18, 2020. In episode 40, I showed a detailed, step-by-step process on how to update the firmware. For today's episode, I just have a video montage of the throttle update process. On the first update attempt, the programming did fail. I ran the update again and it was successful. I am still learning all of the new features of the Digitrax throttle. I want to take a moment and recognize the 2 sponsors of my YouTube channel, CMR Products and Iron Planet Hobbies. CMR Products has designed and developed several in-house brands and are continually creating new items. CMR Products recently released 3D printed scenery details in N-scale. Please check out their products at cmrproducts.com, the link will be in the description, and use the discount code HUMAN for 7% off their in-house brands. Iron Planet Hobbies is the retail side and importer for Digikais, as well as Wi-Fi tracks, DCC for PC, and Massoff. They specialize in DCC and stock nearly 100% of Digitrax, NCE, TCS, Soundtracks, Digikais, ESU, Nix trains, as well as select other products from other brands. Please visit their website at ironplanethobbies.com. The link will be in the description. And use the discount code HUMAN at checkout to receive a 10% discount and free shipping in the USA. The other update related to my throttle is that thanks to my sponsor Iron Planet Hobbies, I now have a Digitrax UR93 Duplex radio transceiver. If you have seen some of my recent running trains videos, you will notice that I keep knocking the throttle onto the ground when I accidentally catch myself on the cord. The UR93 allows me cordless operation of the throttle. The UR93 pretty much sets itself up. You connect the UR93 to your command station over Loconet and plug in the device with the included power supply. Then you connect your Digitrax throttle via a Loconet cable so that it can identify that there is a transceiver on the system. Then you unplug your throttle and it will then connect wirelessly to your UR93. Thank you, Ryan at Iron Planet Hobbies. With the throttle updates completed, I moved on to the repairs of my Kato GG1 Blackjack. Before making any changes, I confirmed that it still worked as expected. I removed the shell to confirm that both motors were in fact working and that the only issue was the missing drive shaft. The parts from Kato came really nicely packaged. I knew how to install the drive shaft from the first time I took the locomotive apart, so this repair was pretty straightforward. With the new drive shaft installed, I tested the Loco again, and it runs so much better with all the drive wheels operating. I was not sure how to take apart the drive wheels to change the traction tires. I did not find any images on the Kato USA website about the drive wheel assemblies. I tried looking at it myself, but I didn't really want to break anything. I eventually found a video online from Cowie Boys called Remove and Clean Kato N-Scale Trucks, Wheels and Gears. From his video, I was able to determine what I needed to do. Instead of trying to peel the trucks off the gear assembly, it was easier to put the drive wheels on the workbench, separate the sides of the wheel assembly slightly, and then pull the gearbox off from the top. The copper contacts will fall off, but the gear assembly did not fall apart. For the first replacement of the traction tires, I did it with the axle still connected to the gear assembly. I used a small pair of tweezers and carefully worked the rubber band type material over the wheel. This process took some patience, so take your time and do not rush. Getting the drive wheel assembly back together requires lining up the copper contacts over the outside of the wheels and then gently slipping the assembly back into the trucks. While not difficult, again, just have patience and do not force it. Do not forget to reinsert the drive shaft and then everything just slips back together. Install the spring for the pilot wheels and then gently press the pilot wheel back into place. At this point, I was considering not replacing the other traction tire. I tested the locomotive and it was running really well. But looking at the difference between the 2 traction tires, It was pretty clear that I should just replace it now, as I would have to do it very soon anyway. Replacing the second tire, now that I knew what to expect, went a bit faster. This time, I removed the axle from the gear assembly. My initial concern was that if I removed the axle that all the gears would fall out, and I did not want to have to reassemble the gearbox. But the Kato Locomotive was very easy to work with, and I did not encounter any surprises. Removing the axle made it a lot easier to install the new traction tire. One item to note when you first try and put the traction tire over the wheel. It seems like that it'll be way too small. It will fit, but you need to gently stretch it over the wheel. Also, the copper contacts do bend easily, so handle them with care. It does take a little bit of force to get everything snapped back together, but not too much. Holding the copper contacts to the wheels during assembly was a bit tricky. I had to take a few deep breaths and keep reminding myself to be patient, and once lined up, everything just slid right together. Reassembling the drive wheels and the pilot wheels was becoming easy for me at this point. Now back on the track, it was running really well. I really think Kato makes some really great locomotives, and this one is no exception. I would like to take a brief moment to thank all of my supporters on both Patreon and those that purchased items from my Teespring store. If you would like to find out more information about supporting this channel, the links are in the description below. Next, I'm going to move on to the decoder installs. I have two Microtrains FT locomotives and one Microtrains SW1500 that I want to convert to DCC. Luckily, both of these locos do take drop-in decoders. The first thing that you need to do to get the shell off is to remove the pilot coupler. I know I've already said this a few times in this video, but you definitely have to be patient with this. During a previous conversion, I was trying to force the coupler out through the front hole on the shell, and the coupler came apart. Reinstalling the centering spring on an N-scale coupler is not an easy task. Therefore, I recommend just take your time and avoid having to rebuild the coupler in the first place. Once the pilot coupler is removed, take the shell off the chassis. I've already completed one of these installs, so for the two locomotives in this video, I was able to move through them fairly quickly. One thing that I did not show in this video was that I used a 9-volt battery to test all of the locos before I do the DCC conversion. I want to make sure that I know the motors and the lights work before I modify anything. When I break something, I want to know who to blame. The hardest part of this decoder install was removing the light shroud. It's not so much that it's hard, it's just that it's the hardest part of this install. Per the instructions, I added a piece of Kapton tape over the chassis to isolate the DCC decoder from the split chassis. You need to make sure the tape is covering the chassis, but not covering the motor contacts. You also need to notch the Kapton tape on the back of the board so that it can slide over the slots on the loco. Okay, so maybe the hardest part of this install isn't getting the light shroud off, it's actually getting it back on. Before I put the shell back on, I tested out my handiwork, and it didn't work. While off camera, I found out that the copper tabs on the decoder were not touching the motor contacts. To fix this, I just bent them in slightly and it solved the problem. I tested the locomotive again once the shell was on, and then moved on to my least favorite part, reinstalling the pilot coupler. This part of the project would be a lot easier with better eyesight and smaller hands. You do not even realize that they make screws this small, unless maybe you're a watchmaker. The second decoder install is also another Microtrains FT unit. I got the decoder for this locomotive and the SW1500 from Iron Planet Hobbies. Since this install is the same as the first decoder install, I'm just going to speed our way through this upgrade and see everyone on the other side. But don't go anywhere if you want to hear my story of how I did not successfully install the last decoder. The third locomotive is a Microtrains SW1500. Both Digitrax and TCS make a drop-in decoder for this locomotive. Since I was already installing Digitrax decoders in the FT units, I thought I'd give the TCS decoder a try. Taking an initial look at the locomotive, I could not figure out how it comes apart, so I took a closer look at the instructions that came with the decoder. While the printed instructions did not really provide any more additional information on the installation, there was a really good step-by-step on the TCS website. Getting the shell off was not easy. The way the power gets from the track to the motor is really interesting on this locomotive. There are copper brushes on the trucks that transfer the power to a copper piece on the shell. Then the copper piece on the shell touches the sides of the chassis, the light board then gets its power from the chassis, and the two wires you see on top of the chassis take the power from the light board to the motor. What I need to do is replace the light board, which actually looks pretty simple. You just remove the wires, slide off the old board, slide in the new board and reconnect the wires. I mean, what could go wrong? I carefully put the locomotive completely back together. Since the copper contacts on the shell transfer track power to the chassis, there's not a simple way to test the locomotive without just putting the shell back on. And now it's time to test my work. At one point, the locomotive just took off at 100%, but after a few seconds it stopped. If you have installed DCC decoders before, you likely know what this means, but I was about to find out. I called up TCS 10 minutes before they were about to close. Unfortunately, I do not remember the name of the person that answered the phone, but they were really helpful. They told me what was likely wrong and suggested a few different ways to test the locomotive, but they said I probably damaged the decoder during the install. In the beginning of this section, when I showed the instructions, you might have noticed this tidbit at the top. I was about to need this service. The test was pretty simple. Remove the decoder and check if there was continuity between the motor wires and the chassis. This would indicate that the motor was shorted out to the chassis. It will still work on DC, but when installing a DCC decoder, there needs to be complete isolation between the motor and the track power. The locomotive running at 100% and then stopping was an indication that I had a short. I just didn't realize it yet. A simple continuity test showed that the motor was contacting one side of the chassis. And the fix is simple. You open the chassis, you put some Kapton tape over the metal part on the motor to isolate it from the chassis. So after confirming that I had a short, I took the chassis apart and made the simple fix. Unfortunately, at this point, the decoder was no longer happy. Eventually, I just removed the decoder and put the light board back in the locomotive and confirmed that it still worked on DC. I got a really good suggestion from Jason the Train Freak. He suggested I take some wires, hook the decoder up to track power, and see if the LED light comes on or if JMRI would detect the decoder. Unfortunately, this did not work, so I went online and filled out the TCS warranty return information and sent off the decoder. As of this video, the decoder should just be arriving at TCS for review. I'm really hoping to get a replacement before Halloween, as I'm hoping to have this locomotive running for the holiday. Well, the good news is that I learned a lot more about decoder installs and it only cost me the price of shipping. I think the lesson is that even with drop-in decoders, you need to test everything thoroughly. Thank you for watching. Please leave any comments or questions below and don't forget to hit the thumbs up. Please subscribe and select the bell icon to receive notifications. Thanks again and have a great day.